Hello everybody, it's Peter with an I, S-T-E-W-A-R-T. Previously,
Nancy, Frank, and Joe got their first phone bill in the mail, which was huge! They considered just fleeing, but their phone bill would come after them, like Dr. Frankenstein being stalked by his monster.
Since going on the lam would be useless, they decided they better find a way to pay that thing.
Chapter 8. Nancy waited nervously at the desk while the interviewer studied the paperwork. She figured that dressing nicely and typing her resume already put her ahead of all the others applying for the job seen in the want ad section of the magazine she had looked through. She still wasn't sure she should have added the angry little eyebrows over the E's in resume. The kids had decided to go out and find themselves some jobs to pay for their bill. They would have started off in fast food like any other kid, but their bill was so large, they needed to find work that paid more than just flipping burgers. The interviewer flipped over the one-sided paper without finding any print. "I'm afraid I only have the first sheet here," said the interviewer. "There's only one," replied Nancy, nodding her head. The interviewer shifted and cleared his throat, unsure how to continue. "Well, it looks like you've achieved some good marks in college?" he asked, still wondering if there was some sort of mistake. "No, haven't gone to college yet," she admitted. "But I plan to," she added, wondering if maybe they would let her work and take classes in that field concurrently. "Well, what makes you think you'd be qualified to be a brain surgeon?" he asked. "I've always been interested in the medical profession, and I'm willing to work weekends," she assured him. She didn't get the job. At first, Joe's interviewer looked disgusted that he would even waste her time as her eyes first set upon his pathetically short resume. But after looking through it for a moment, she found the content very interesting. "It says here that you worked for the Goldstein and Moskowitz legal firm. Were you a paralegal?" asked the interviewer, taking into account his age. Yes, replied Joe. He didn't even know what a paralegal was, but he knew it had something to do with law, and courts, and huge amounts of money. "That puts you in a good position," said the interviewer. "What sort of things did they have you doing there?" Joe was stumped. "Oh, just going to court and stuff." "So you were an attaché? That's very impressive," she said. "Which lawyer did you work for?" she asked. "Goldstein," replied Joe, feeling pretty slick that he didn't even have to think about the answer. It just rolled off his tongue like it was the truth. "That's very interesting." "I'm Goldstein," she said with a hardened tone. It took Joe a moment to realize the fatal flaw he had made. "The position we have open here at the university is for a professor of English," said the interviewer. Frank, who was wearing horn-rimmed glasses and a burgundy evening jacket while he smoked a grandfather pipe, nodded his head. The interviewer was intrigued with Frank. She saw that the eyeglasses lacked lenses, the pipe wasn't even lit, and the evening jacket was actually a bathrobe. The interviewer assumed Frank was such an incredible genius. He didn't have room in his lobes to comprehend convention. Some of the greatest physicists they had in the school couldn't feed themselves. The interviewer knew Frank was something special when he couldn't even sign his own name. "Professor of English. I'll take it," said Frank, truly believing he could do it. Earlier, when Nancy helped him pick out the wardrobe for the interview, she had to keep herself from laughing as she led him to believe that the only thing involved with being a professor of English was teaching people how to speak with an English accent.
Just get off my property! No!
Speaking with an English accent is easy. I don't know why anyone needs to be taught how to do it, reasoned Frank. Most people aren't as gifted as you, Frank, she said, fighting against the volatile mountain of laughter that threatened to explode at any moment. One of my favorite shows is Boomerang, Frank explained to the interviewer, who nodded in agreement to what seemed like a completely tangential statement. She assumed that Frank's mind was such a complex web, the common person couldn't pretend to fathom its brilliant workings. It says here that you wrote a treatise on the novel War and Peace, said the interviewer. Yes, it does, nodded Frank, noting how clever Nancy was when typing up his resume. She had the foresight to see that Frank might be quizzed on what these books were about. With such book titles, the answer lies in the question.
War and Peace is about War and Peace.
Other books Frank had supposedly done theses on were Crime and Punishment.
It's about crime and punishment.
A Tale of Two Cities.
It's a tale of two cities.
And, for the grand prize, Nancy threw in the novel, As I Lay Dying. Nancy gave him specific instructions on how to pull off the last one. It would be tenfold more daring than the others, and would take a thespian worthy of Hamlet, but if successful, it would put Frank over the top with an aura of not only intellectual genius, but also of sweeping world experience. Frank knew he couldn't pull it off, but Nancy assured him he probably wouldn't even be asked about his treatise on As I Lay Dying. So it says here you wrote a treatise on As I Lay Dying. That's one of my favorite classics. Tell me your interpretation of it, requested the interviewer, enthusiastic to hear the music of knowledge pour from the lips of this evidently great scholar. Frank bowed his head, not in disgrace or defeat, but rather to gather his wits and call upon the power and pathos of Dionysus. He lifted his head, pained. As I lay dying, he began, drudging up the distant but no less painful memory that haunted his past. He drew in a labored breath. I'm sorry. I'm afraid I can't talk about it, he said, wishing the memory had been left buried. Or so it would seem to the interviewer, who assumed that Frank based his work on personal experience. The interviewer not only wanted Frank as a professor, she silently weighed the idea of giving him her personal phone number.
Thanks for watching today's presentation, and don't forget to look up my podcast. Doesn't cost anything. Search for Peter Stewart, and don't forget the I.